Have you ever wondered what happens when the country's highest court gives a ruling that could shape how important criminal laws are interpreted for years to come? Well, that's exactly why so many Nigerians are paying close attention to the latest legal developments connected to Nnamdi Kanu's case. This is not just about one individual. It is also about how Nigerian courts interpret repealed laws, constitutional rights, and whether ongoing criminal cases can continue even after the law under which they started has been replaced. The Supreme Court's latest decision has sparked fresh conversations among lawyers, political observers, and ordinary Nigerians who want to understand exactly what it means. Before we get into all the details, if you enjoy balanced updates that explain major Nigerian stories in simple language without unnecessary drama, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with others who want reliable explanations, and leave a comment telling us what you think about this development. Your support helps us continue bringing carefully researched reports just like this one. Now, let's break everything down step by step. According to reports surrounding the judgment, the Supreme Court addressed legal questions relating to the use of provisions from Nigeria's previous terrorism legislation after that law had been repealed and replaced by a newer one. One of the central arguments raised over time by Nnamdi Kanu's legal team has been that some of the charges relied on provisions of a law that was no longer in force. His lawyers argued that because the law had been repealed, those charges could no longer stand. On the other hand, the federal government has maintained that transitional or saving provisions in the new law allow ongoing matters connected to the old law to continue under certain circumstances. For many Nigerians, this can sound very technical, so let's make it easier to understand. Imagine a school changes its rule book during the school year. One obvious question would be, what happens to disciplinary cases that already started before the new rule book came into effect? Do those cases automatically disappear, or do they continue under special transition rules? That is similar to the legal issue that has generated so much debate in this matter. A repealed law simply means a law that has been removed or replaced by another law. But in many legal systems, including Nigeria's, Parliament often includes provisions explaining what happens to actions, investigations, or court cases that already existed before the new law took effect. Lawyers commonly refer to these as saving clauses or transitional provisions. That is where much of the legal disagreement has been focused. Supporters of Nnamdi Kanu's legal arguments have insisted that a person should not continue to face prosecution under legislation that has already been repealed. They argue that constitutional protections require criminal charges to be based on laws that are legally in force. Meanwhile, government lawyers have consistently argued that the repeal of the earlier terrorism law did not automatically wipe away ongoing proceedings. Instead, they say the replacement legislation specifically preserved existing liabilities and ongoing prosecutions, allowing the courts to continue hearing such matters. This disagreement has remained one of the most discussed legal aspects of the entire case. To understand why this matters so much, it helps to briefly look back at how the case developed. Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of IPOB, has faced a long series of legal proceedings stretching back several years. His arrest, subsequent release on bail, departure from Nigeria, return to Nigerian custody in 2021, and multiple court proceedings have all attracted national and international attention. Throughout these proceedings, several legal questions have been argued before different courts, including issues concerning jurisdiction, extraordinary rendition, constitutional rights, and the validity of terrorism-related charges. One issue that repeatedly resurfaced was whether the repeal of Nigeria's earlier terrorism legislation affected the charges. Different lawyers interpreted the law differently. Some believed repeal meant the prosecution had lost its legal foundation. Others argued that repeal never erased liability because Parliament specifically anticipated this possibility by inserting transitional provisions. That is why legal experts watch the Supreme Court's position so closely. The importance of a Supreme Court judgment goes beyond the immediate parties involved because Supreme Court decisions often guide lower courts across Nigeria whenever similar legal questions arise in the future. In practical terms, if the apex court confirms that saving provisions preserve pending prosecutions after a law is repealed, that interpretation could influence many future criminal cases involving legislative changes. On the other hand, if courts were to rule that repeal automatically ends such prosecutions, it could significantly affect how criminal legislation is drafted in the future. So, although public attention often focuses on the personalities involved, lawyers are equally interested in the legal principles established by the court. Reports indicate that the legal reasoning centered heavily on whether the replacement terrorism law contained valid transitional provisions that preserved existing proceedings, rather than whether repeal alone automatically invalidated earlier charges. That distinction is extremely important. Repealing a law does not always mean everything connected to that law immediately disappears. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. Everything depends on the wording of the replacement legislation and how the courts interpret it. This is one reason why legal drafting receives so much attention whenever the National Assembly passes new legislation. Every word can have significant consequences years later. Another reason this judgment has attracted so much interest is because Nnamdi Kanu's case has remained one of Nigeria's most closely watched legal proceedings for several years. People from different parts of the country have followed each hearing with great interest. Some focus mainly on the constitutional issues. Others are interested in questions surrounding criminal procedure. Some are concerned about broader national security implications. Others see the matter through the lens of civil liberties and due process. Because of these different perspectives, almost every court decision generates widespread discussion both online and offline. Legal analysts have also pointed out that this case demonstrates how complicated constitutional litigation can become when multiple legal issues overlap. For example, arguments concerning repealed legislation are separate from arguments relating to jurisdiction. Those are different from questions surrounding arrest procedures, and those differ again from discussions about the evidence presented during trial. Each legal issue must usually be examined independently. That explains why some arguments may succeed while others may not. It is also worth remembering that court decisions are generally based on legal principles presented before the judges rather than on public opinion. Judges examine statutes. They study previous judicial decisions. They interpret constitutional provisions. They review arguments from both sides. Then they apply the law as they understand it. Whether people agree or disagree with the outcome, the legal reasoning behind the judgment often becomes just as important as the final decision itself. For lawyers and law students, cases like this frequently become reference materials for years afterward because they clarify how certain legal provisions should be interpreted. For ordinary Nigerians, however, the biggest question is often much simpler. What does this mean going forward? Depending on the specific issues resolved, the judgment may influence future appeals, ongoing proceedings, and how similar legal questions are argued in Nigerian courts. Legal experts are expected to continue studying the full reasoning contained in the judgment to better understand its wider implications. As more legal analysis becomes available, there will likely be continued debate among constitutional lawyers, criminal law specialists, and public affairs commentators. That is completely normal after significant Supreme Court decisions. Different experts often reach different conclusions, even while reading the same judgment. What remains important is allowing discussions to be guided by verified legal documents rather than speculation. If you're finding this explanation helpful, don't forget to like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe so you never miss future updates on important national issues. Share this video with friends and family who have been following this case, and most importantly, join the conversation respectfully in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts while keeping the discussion civil and focused on the facts. As this story continues to develop, attention will likely shift toward how legal practitioners, constitutional scholars, and the parties involved interpret the full implications of the Supreme Court's reasoning. As always, it is best to rely on official court documents and credible reporting before drawing conclusions, since legal judgments are often more detailed than the headlines suggest. Thank you for watching, and thank you for choosing balanced and informative reporting. Stay informed, keep following verified developments, and we'll continue bringing you clear explanations of the stories shaping Nigeria today.